At 7:30 a.m. on April the 17th, 1975, the war in Cambodia was over. It was a unique war, for no country has ever experienced such concentrated bombing. On this, perhaps the most gentle and graceful land in all of Asia, President Nixon and Mr. Kissinger unleashed 100,000 tons of bombs, the equivalent of 5 Hiroshimas. The bombing was their personal decision, illegally and secretly. They bombed Cambodia, a neutral country, back to the Stone Age. And I mean Stone Age in its literal sense. Shortly after dawn on April the 17th, the bombing stopped and there was silence. Then out of the forest came the victors, the Khmer Rouge, whose power had grown out of all proportion to their numbers. They entered the capital Phnom Penh, a city most of them had never seen. They marched in disciplined Indian file through the long boulevards and the still traffic. They wore black and were mostly teenagers. And people cheered them, nervously, naively. After all, the bombing, the fighting, was over at last. The horror began almost immediately. Phnom Penh, a city of 2.5 million people, was forcibly emptied within hours of their coming, the sick and wounded being dragged from their hospital beds, dying children being carried in plastic bags, the old and crippled being dumped beside the road, and all of them being marched at gunpoint into the countryside and toward a totally new society, the like of which we have never known. The new rulers of Cambodia called 1975 Year Zero, the dawn of an age in which there would be no families, no sentiment, no expressions of love or grief, no medicines, no hospitals, no schools, no books, no learning, no holidays, no music, no song, no post, no money, only work and death. Cambodia. Where is Cambodia, some of you might ask? Unlike Vietnam, its neighbor, Cambodia has been virtually sealed for 4 years, its suffering invisible. In a world of saturation news, there has been no news of what was really done to more than 7 million people, of whom at least 2 million are missing, believed murdered. That's about a third of the entire population. Proportionately, it's Birmingham, Manchester, and London exterminated. For me, coming here has been like stumbling into something I could never imagine. And what follows is the first complete film report by Westerners from the ashes of a gentle land. And I have to say there are scenes which may upset some of you.
This is Phnom Penh, once a modern, bustling city, greater than Amsterdam or Brussels. For 4 years it stood silent, abandoned, as if in the wake of a nuclear war that spared only the buildings. And this is how I remember it. The capital of a land of plenty, of markets everywhere, a land that produced 3 annual harvests, and a variety of fruit renowned in Asia. The Chinese, in search of a superlative, used to say, as rich as Cambodia. One man above all reflected this image, Norodom Sihanouk, self-styled god-king, jazz lover, movie maker, conspirator, demagogue. Sihanouk preserved Cambodia's independence like an absurd juggler in a cockpit of war. In 1970, he was overthrown in the chaos that followed the American bombing. In the spring of 1969, American B-52s had begun the secret bombing of neutral Cambodia. These top-secret military cables, obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, were part of a cover-up that was the real beginning of Watergate. The pilots were sworn not to tell even their superiors, and their logs were falsified. The official aim of the bombing was to wipe out a Viet Cong base in Cambodia, a base that existed only in the imagination of American generals. President Nixon's aim was to show the Vietnamese communists just how tough he could be, a policy he once described as the madman theory of war. The Cambodians who died were called collateral damage, and their burning villages were called friendly fire. The Pentagon had described Cambodians as a docile and passive people who cannot be relied upon to act in a positive way for the benefit of American policies. In 1970, the United States invaded Cambodia. A member of Dr. Kissinger's staff described how the invasion was launched. Nixon had been watching his favorite movie, Patton, whose war heroics seemed to fortify his toughness. Kissinger had been dining out on stories of Nixon's drinking.
Shortly before the invasion, Nixon, who was drunk, spoke to Kissinger on the phone. He slurred, "If this doesn't work, it'll be your ass, Henry." Kissinger had once described Nixon as unfit to be president. He also called him a meatball mind. Between the two of them, they began the destruction of those passive, docile people, thousands of miles away here in Cambodia. Of course, Nixon was later apprehended, not for the murder of Cambodia, but for a domestic affair called Watergate. Kissinger received the Nobel Peace Prize.
Out of the inferno of bombs came Pol Pot, a former Buddhist monk, and the Khmer Rouge, whose revolution had never enjoyed a popular base until Nixon's madman theory of war. The bombing upset the delicate balance of royalists, republicans, and communists. It triggered a war that caused at least 1 million dead and wounded, and tore apart the very fabric of Cambodia.
When I came to Cambodia in 1967, Phnom Penh was the most beautiful city in Southeast Asia. Perhaps it's too easy for a foreigner to romanticize such a place, but to fly across the Mekong River from beleaguered and neurotic Saigon was to reaffirm the belief that if only foreign armies would leave alone these people, they would assert their own civilization and measure their own prosperity.
Certainly there was feudalism and corruption, but there was no war, no slaughter, no napalm, and the Cambodian family was a fortress without want. And now this delicious city is a smouldering wreck of that vision. Gangs of scavengers, mostly children, forage in the empty houses, offices, schools, cinemas, parks, museums. In all but a few places, there is no electricity and no sewerage. The water supply is polluted by the bodies of